Order. Could I ask members to leave quietly? We're just about to start the next debate. Adam Thompson to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Ms Vaz. Our universities are integral to a thriving United Kingdom. They drive economic growth, they ensure that the workforce has the skills necessary for the jobs of tomorrow, and they boost the UK's global standing. They are indeed engines of social and economic progress, but behind these important functions lies an equally important reality: the financial sustainability of this vital sector and our economy. For almost a decade, universities have faced declining investment, despite the recognition of the world-leading higher education and research system. As chair of the all-party parliamentary group for universities, Vice-Chancellors from a range of institutions have told me that the pressure to deliver world-class teaching and research with less is becoming more acute. The Government's announcement on the 4th of November 2024 of an inflationary increase to tuition fees in England could not have been an easy decision, but it was necessary. Prior to this announcement, tuition fees have risen only once by £250 since the introduction of £9,000 fees in 2012. Inflation has cut their value to just £5,924 in 2012-13 prices, while government grants for teaching have also declined by 78% over a decade in England. The financial picture across the UK is equally challenging. Welsh universities have their fees capped at a lower level than English institutions until 2024, and over the last decade, funding per student in Scotland has declined by over £2,500. In Northern Ireland, funding per student has lagged behind England by over £1,000 a year. The Office for Students estimates that by 25-26, there will be a net reduction in income for the sector of £3.4 billion. And, without a significant mitigating actions, a sector-level deficit of £1.6 billion, with up to 72% of providers being in deficit and 40% having low liquidity. I know from my conversations with Vice-Chancellors that whilst the causes of the funding challenges vary significantly from institution to institution, they're all feeling the pressure to deliver more for less. As inflationary rise in fees is important, an inflationary rise in fees is important because it prevents further erosion of university funding for teaching undergraduates, but it doesn't reverse the real-term decline in the value of the tuition fee. Yes, I will give way.
But it does pose a question, and I want to ask the Honourable Gentleman his thoughts on it. I referred to the cost of living pressures that every family has, wherever they may be in this United Kingdom, combined with the increase of higher education fees, will mean that we are in danger, I suspect, of going back to a state where only well-off families can afford to have their children in university, while the rest will have to go to work to provide the monies just to live. Does he share that concern that I have?
Thanks, Chair. I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I think he raises an excellent point there, and it's very important that we bear this in mind. I think there is a danger there, and that's something that we need to contend with. The conversation I hope to start with this debate today is to look forward to how we might address these issues going forward, and I'll touch on some of those points in the coming speech, but thank you for the intervention. As I say, I know from my conversations with Vice-Chancellors, Chair, that whilst the causes of funding challenges vary significantly, they're all feeling the pressure to deliver more. This rise in inflation, rise in fees is important because it means that further erosion of university funding for teaching undergraduates, but it doesn't reverse the real-term decline in the value of the tuition fee. So that's why there needs to be, I think, a concerted and strategic effort by both universities and government to secure the long-term financial sustainability of our universities, touching on the point my honourable friend makes there. So what are the main financial risks that universities are facing? Analysis from PwC shows that a significant number of universities are vulnerable to reductions in international student numbers, increased expenditure and reduction in the growth rate of domestic undergraduate students. The risks identified by PwC's analysis are not just hypothetical. In many cases, we're already starting to see their impact, especially in terms of international student recruitment. After almost a decade of stagnation, the UK experienced a period of significant growth in international students between 2019 and 2022, driven by a combination of government policy and the openness of the UK immediately following the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the numbers of international students choosing to study in the UK has since declined as both political and market factors have changed, and the attractiveness of the UK as a study destination has fallen. According to the data released by the Home Office on the 28th of November, 392,669 visas were issued to international students between October 2023 and September 2024, which is 19% fewer than were issued in the previous year. Universities understand that growth in international student numbers must be sustainable and that the experience for those choosing to study here would be truly world-class. However, policy changes under the previous government, such as restrictions on dependent visas, increased visa and immigration costs, as well as threats to the future of the UK's post-work study offer, have had a significant impact on the attractiveness of the UK as a study destination, as well as the perception of the UK as an open and welcoming country. A key finding from the IDP's Emerging Futures 6 report was that the biggest influence on study destination choice for prospective students is post-work study opportunities and indeed work opportunities. And I commend the Secretary of State for Education for reaffirming this government's commitment to supporting and valuing international students. I ask, though, Chair, will the government back this up by committing to maintaining the graduate route on its current terms for the duration of this Parliament? Another significant financial risk is membership of the Teachers' Pension Scheme, which is affecting a lot of universities, the TPS. Universities that are statutorily obliged to be members of the TPS, primarily modern post-92 universities, are now required to pay pension contributions of around 29% for 58,000 members of staff, compared to 16.4% in 2019, a very significant increase. This is one of the highest employer contributions of any pension across the whole country. Universities can't exit the TPS or take actions to reduce the employer contribution, and they haven't been granted the same additional funding as schools and colleges to meet the costs of the scheme. So I ask, Chair, again, that will ministers in the Department for Education commit to working with ministers in His Majesty's Treasury to explore how universities can be provided with flexibility to allow consideration of alternative pension pots. I'll turn now, Chair, to the structural issues in university research funding, and my own background as a research scientist. This was something I faced daily prior to my election to this place. Research funding risks seeing the UK's world-class capabilities and competitive advantages being eroded. Despite recent increases in investment, the current system relies on disproportionate and growing cross-subsidy from universities to make research viable, which, given the current financial challenges faced by the universities, has produced a huge gap in funding. To quote all of the VCs that I've spoken to recently, research operates at a loss, and this is a significant issue that they're facing. It's estimated that for every £1 of public money invested in university research and innovation, the country gets back £10 a year. It's a huge return on investment. But in 2022-2023, UK universities incurred a £5.3 billion deficit in research activities. In short, the system is structurally unsustainable. Although the budget recently highlighted how serious this government is about funding university research, we urgently need, I think, an ambitious and long-term approach from the government to funding university research, and I would welcome the Minister's views on this point. So why does all this matter? The UK's performance in HE and research is exceptional, in my opinion and life experience. It surpasses significantly our international counterparts. UK universities deliver the highest degree completion rates across the OECD and are recognised as world-class, generating £25.6 billion of export earnings, while broadening the UK's soft power and strengthening global relationships. The UK has the third largest share of the world's academic publications, about 6.3%. That's what I spent much of the last decade of my life producing. And we are behind only China and the United States in that world, with an even larger share of the world's most highly cited publications at 13.4%, which is, I think, a really great achievement and shows how good our universities are. These latest figures, though, show the UK higher education sector's teaching, research and innovation activities had an economic impact of £265 billion. Talking about a huge sector here. These impacts are felt across the country, including in the East Midlands, which is where I represent, where universities in that region contributed £6.3 billion in gross output and £4.2 billion in gross value added to the UK economy. These figures include my former employer, the University of Nottingham, but also a range of other excellent institutions right across my region, all with unique and valuable offerings to their communities and beyond. Underfunding, I think, will restrict universities' ability to drive inclusive economic growth and the UK's global competitiveness, as well as provide opportunities to current students that are comparable to previous years. Sustained funding that ensures a high-quality student experience and enhances the UK's ability to deliver world-leading research and innovation will rapidly accelerate the positive contributions of our universities. However, the current funding system in England also affects the ability of students to meet living costs. And this touches on the points that my honourable friend was making a little while ago. And therefore, this makes the most of the range of experiences and activities that make up university life. Frozen household income thresholds and a failure to adequately uprate the maintenance package with inflation means the average student's maintenance loan is estimated to fall by £504, short of covering their living costs each month. This particularly affects disadvantaged students who are forced to take on higher levels of debt and paid employment, which limits their ability to study. I very much commend the government for announcing last month an inflationary increase to maintenance support for students in England, but I ask as well, Chair, will the government commit to reintroducing maintenance grants for students from the most disadvantaged backgrounds and indicate a time frame from when this might be possible, if that is indeed possible? Greater effectiveness and efficiency are necessary for our universities to thrive in the coming decade. They must reform, do things differently, prioritise some things and deprioritise others. Operating models need to evolve to become more effective and more efficient, and I know from my conversations with Vice-Chancellors that universities in all 4 nations in the UK are already making significant changes to adjust to these pressures, including, in some cases, significant restructuring and transformation programmes. Indeed, around the election, as I was leaving my former employment, my own university was going through a significant redundancy package. However, without a small change to the overall context, many universities are going to be forced to make cuts that are in the interest of their institution, but not in the national interest. Such cuts, I think, will jeopardise the crucial roles that all types of universities play in their local communities. Some have a profoundly local mission, educating the public sector workforce for their local areas, while others attract amounts of investment. They all play a part right across the whole of the country. Many of our universities are currently making difficult decisions, and colleagues will know this around the room, I'm sure. This means closing degree courses with low student demand, but also of national strategic importance, such as modern foreign languages and arts and humanities courses. We're losing a lot of these courses. There's a real risk that certain courses will only be available in a limited number of institutions, and that means they'll become slowly out of reach for students who can't travel to study or can't meet highly competitive entry requirements. Diminished financial stability for universities clearly has potentially harmful repercussions for students, staff and our wider national economy. I think, therefore, it's essential that change is not just about doing more with less. Universities' underlying operating models need to evolve to become more efficient and effective as possible, and they must be supported by the government to do this at the national level. My understanding is that Universities UK, which is the collective voice of 141 of our UK universities, is committed to establishing cross-sector transformation and efficiency task force to seek savings through greater collaboration. The task force is one of the main recommendations from the Universities UK's recent report, which I would strongly encourage colleagues to have a good read of. It's called Opportunity, Growth and Partnership, a Blueprint for Change. The task force will be established by the end of 2024 and will report for the first time in summer 2025. It's going to take a 3-step approach, Chair. So the first step, the task force will evaluate progress and lessons learned since the last major review into sector efficiency, identifying what's been achieved in the last decade while looking forward to the next, making recommendations to unlock opportunities that lie ahead. Second, the task force will identify opportunities for savings through greater collaboration between universities. There are already some great examples of this. The UCAS system is effectively a shared service, and so the university sector's IT network run by JISC. Individual universities have found creative ways of working together, sharing resources, like the shared out-of-hours IT service set up by Northumbria University, which is now used by 1/3 of universities around the country. Finally, the task force is going to bring university leaders together to look at structural changes, creating regional groupings of universities or even mergers and acquisitions where appropriate, and this could deliver savings in the long term. I'd strongly encourage the government to engage with the sector as it embarks on the creation of this task force as deeply as possible. Moving forward, I'd like to turn to the steps needed that I think we need to support our universities so that they can, in turn, support our nation's renewal. Universities UK's recent blueprint report recommends a 2-phase approach for universities and government here. So phase 1 requires some immediate steps, and this involves increasing funding for teaching, to meet the real costs through a combination of index-linking tuition fees to inflation each year, as well as restoring the teaching grant to previous levels. The Exchequer now only contributes 16% of the cost of funding a student through higher education, with the rest, which is 84%, picked up by the graduate in England. The balance needs redressing, I think, through increase in government investment. Second part of the first phase here is to ensure policy stability in relation to international students to achieve sustainable and managed growth in that area, working with the sector to establish a sustainable solution for universities in relation to significant increase in contributions to the Teachers' Pension Scheme. And then finally, a government and the sector should have a clear plan, I think, should a university in England find itself in severe financial distress. And this is something that I think is a very real possibility at the moment, although alleviated by the government's recent efforts. Plans to manage the immediate situation and protect the reputation of the HE sector should be in place with the support of independent experts to guide institutions in financial difficulty to find a viable way forward. There are different possible models for such an intervention, but it's crucial to protect students and others who depend on the university, including local public services. And just to summarise, Chair, the second phase of the task force effort there, phase 2 will involve some longer-term steps, and I think this is probably going to include developing a contract with the university sector to deliver sustainable, managed growth in international student recruitment, changes to the way that VAT is charged so it's easier for universities to share services, and finally introducing a transformational fund to enable and accelerate changes to universities' operating and business models to achieve greater efficiency. Thank you, Chair.
The question is that this House has considered the financial sustainability of further education. Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And may I also congratulate my honourable friend Earwash for securing this important debate today and also making such a comprehensive speech with some very important points which have also been raised with me locally as the MP for Luton South and South Bedfordshire. Great universities are one of our success stories here in the UK. World rankings show that Britain boasts more top-ranking institutions than across the entirety of the EU, and the UK has long been an attractive destination for students and academics from across the globe. The University of Bedfordshire, in my constituency of Luton South and South Bedfordshire, is no exception, and I declare my interest both as a former employee and a former master's student. With an education heritage going back more than 100 years, first as a technical college and subsequently a college of higher education, and now a university, it is an internationally recognised, award-winning institution that played an important role in Luton and the surrounding area, giving young people from less advantaged socio-economic backgrounds, often the first in their family to go to university, the opportunity to open doors through study. The university also acts as a major employer and community stakeholder in Luton, engaging with our diverse community and supporting key regeneration projects in the town. However, the makeup of the student population is perhaps what sets it apart from others. Around 70% of students are mature returners to education, 50% from ethnically diverse backgrounds, and over 4,000 international students annually. This is a testament to the thriving and welcoming culture for people of all ages and backgrounds to learn. However, as we've heard, unfortunately, the higher education sector is currently in crisis. Universities are facing severe financial challenges after years of neglect by the Conservatives, leaving students and taxpayers to bear the brunt. Many universities are trying to find ways to reduce their budgets to combat these challenges, but that comes at a cost, losing staff via redundancy schemes, cuts to specific departments or courses, or sadly, going bust altogether. So whilst the recent tuition fee cap increase announced by the Education Secretary allows breathing room for some universities, a difficult decision though it was, the University of Bedfordshire is experiencing significant issues due to changes introduced by the previous government. The impact of the policy restricting those on student visas bringing dependents has resulted in approximately a 16% decline in applications across the country this year. And for institutions such as the University of Bedfordshire, this policy has been detrimental. Every level of leadership, from the Vice-Chancellor through the student union representatives from Beds SU, including representatives of Unison Trade Union, have all raised this matter with me, emphasising the worry this is causing. The university has previously been held afloat by international admissions, but with ever-declining numbers, this is not sustainable. So I would be grateful if the Minister could confirm whether there has been any impact assessment done by their department to establish if this policy change has been positive for higher education settings. So fundamentally, none of us want to see our higher education settings close their doors, and I'm proud that this Labour government is committed to fixing the foundations, to deliver change for students, and the commitment to undertake a major package of reform to deliver value for money for taxpayers and students, ending the cycle of students being asked to pay more while getting less. The University of Bedfordshire does so much to raise the status of our town and to bring investment, enterprise and employment. So as we fix the foundations of now, it's vital we support them to deliver high-class, transformative education that students expect and deserve, to break down those barriers to opportunity as they produce the future leaders of tomorrow from all backgrounds and all socio and economic circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Vance. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Erewash for securing this important debate. University funding is undoubtedly in crisis. We've heard mentions of universities around the country, and there is a similar story at mine which I will tell later on. The previous government broke the sector's finances, and this left the country with a system that is unfair to students while pushing many institutions to the brink. And we shouldn't forget, in amongst that, the lecturers who work so hard in our universities too, and all those support staff. On the other side, we have students who increasingly feel burdened by the cost of living crisis and the long-term repayment of loans. And when I speak to students today in my constituency of Cheltenham, it is a very different picture to the one that existed when I went to university in the early noughties in terms of how much you pay for rent, how much you pay for food, how much you pay for energy bills. Now, the previous government made the tuition fee system unfair. We cannot support, however, the Liberal Democrats cannot support simply raising fees at this stage without substantial reforms. At this stage, the right thing to do would be to undertake a full review of finance in the sector to consider ways to improve access to and participation in degrees, as well as the quality of courses, because value for money for students remains extremely important. While the sector is struggling, we must absolutely not lose sight of the key challenge. That is removing barriers to entry for new students themselves. And that is why the Liberal Democrats believe that the reintroduction of maintenance grants is a vital first step. And I'm heartened to hear the member for Erewash raise that in his opening remarks today. These maintenance grants were scrapped by the Conservatives in 2016, and that makes it so much harder for young people from less well-off backgrounds to even get to university in the first place. It is regrettable that the new government is not yet committing to the full restoration of maintenance grants, and we urge ministers to consider this as a way of bringing fairness back into the system. But scrapping maintenance grants was not the only way the Conservatives made the system less fair for students and for lecturers and for universities and everybody else. They stretched that repayment period so far into the future that some of today's students will be paying back their loans until 2066. And they lowered the repayment threshold, leaving students paying back an extra £206 per year. And the mention of foreign students earlier on is pertinent. It's been mentioned by all speakers so far, and I'll now move on to that. The combination of the visa crackdowns and the rhetoric about foreign-born students placed further stress on the sector. The upshot is that the Office for Students suggests that about 40% of universities are likely to run a deficit this year. Now, locally, the University of Gloucestershire, which is based in my constituency and that of the members for Gloucester and Tewkesbury, tells me that of a turnover of £85 million, £65 million comes from tuition fees, and around £20 million of that is from foreign students. But this year, they've seen reductions in foreign students in both the January and the autumn intakes. As I said, this isn't just about that visas issue. This is also about rhetoric. And when I speak to the University of Gloucestershire, they tell me that their agents who go and recruit students from abroad are saying that the feedback from those students is that perhaps they're not quite so wanted in the UK as they once were. So they're selecting degree courses perhaps in Australia, America, Canada, elsewhere, where they feel more welcome.
The result of this is a £4 million hit to the University of Gloucestershire's tuition fees revenue. That's significant. And the university is, as a result, closing some courses and consolidating others, reducing student choice. Some courses combining multiple humanities are the first to close. Fashion is likely to go as well. That said, they're doing what the Liberal Democrats have suggested too, cutting non-teaching costs and innovating. And it is taking advantage of Cheltenham's cyber-security future. The University of Gloucestershire recently opened a new £5.8 million cyber and digital centre. This will help cement Cheltenham's position as the cyber capital of the UK. And it places the university in the same sphere as Synam, the local industry group, and alongside high-performing SMEs that drive the local economy. And that kind of innovation has to be at the centre of what universities are doing in the future. But, however, the university warns that the benefit of the £300 tuition fee increase that is being offered this year by the government is likely to be wiped out by the changes to national insurance for employers. And that is a point I would like the Minister's response on later on. So the challenge for the new government is to put things right, change the rhetoric, and reinstate as much fairness into the system as they possibly can. And we know that is not going to be easy. We've all had challenges in the past, haven't we? But we cannot, at this stage, as Liberal Democrats, support an increase in fees. Reports now suggest that fees are to break the £10,000 barrier fairly soon and rise to £10,500 over the next 5 years. Before we could support that, more work is needed to undo the failures of the past government and restore fairness to the system. Thank you.
Opposition spokesperson Neil O'Brien.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and it's been a pleasure to listen to some excellent speeches this afternoon from the members from Erewash, from Luton South and from Cheltenham, and I took different things from all of them. Now, in my remarks today, I'm going to concentrate on the teaching side of universities, but just to note at the start, the last government did put a huge amount more money into research as well, growing government spending on research from 9.8 billion in 2011 to 16.1 billion, and increasing research and development as a share of the economy. And I was part of doing that, and I'm proud of what we did in that front. But let me turn to the teaching side, which is perhaps the most topical part of this discussion. It is absolutely the case that there are a number of institutions, and of course I won't be naming them today, that are financially stressed and are thinking hard about their future and how they operate. And I know people working in some of these institutions, and it is not easy. But I want to take a step back and examine the context a little bit before we talk about those pressures. Working together with the Liberal Democrats, we brought in fees that did not necessarily work out politically for the Liberal Democrats at the time, but it's good that we now find ourselves once again together in agreeing that it's not sensible to simply increase fees without reform. As has already been noted in the debate, the financial benefit to university of the fee increase is wiped out by the increase in the national insurance contribution. One broken promise not to increase taxes is paying for another broken promise to increase fees. So it's a real connoisseur's policy decision here. In real terms, universities are left with less at the end of that as a result. So the pressures that the members for Erewash and Luton South alluded to, of course, are now made worse by the government's decisions. So the successes, we should note, of the system are that it has hugely increased participation rates, and it's caused participation in England to grow dramatically faster than in the devolved authorities in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. And in particular, it's dramatically increased the participation of the poorest people in our society. You can measure that in 3 different ways. You can look at free school meals, where those on FSM, the proportion of them going to university has doubled, or it's gone up by about a third for non-FSM kids. You can look at it using the polar metric, which is the sector's own measure of localities where not many people go to university. We can see that both in absolute and relative terms, the disadvantage gap has shrunk. Or we can use, as Universities Wales do, the index of multiple deprivation, and we can see that looking at the bottom fifth, the fifth poorest of areas in each of the nations, while Wales and Scotland, Labour on Wales and England, had similar numbers going to university, about 13-14% back in 2006. The participation of those poorer students has grown much more rapidly in England, up to 33% compared to just 20% in Wales, because we made some difficult decisions, and there have been benefits to those difficult decisions. Much of the growth of higher education is a good thing. As the first in my families to go. My generation were the first to go to university. It was wonderful. It's a great experience. It generally is a very good experience for most people who go. Universities are a wonderful thing, not just because of the research that goes on within them, not just because of the wonderful teaching that goes on in them, but also because of the wider benefits to the community, the impact on their local society. I used to remember going to Huddersfield University as a teenager. If you looked nonchalant and like a student, you could just wander in and read all these wonderful books. And that's just one of the kind of benefits they're bringing to lots of our country. But not all is perfect in the garden, because a university education now is not cheap. We put in a lot of resources. And while in real terms, the decision to hold down the resources over recent years in order to hold down the cost for students has reduced in real terms that funding per student. It's still above when I went to university, still higher in real terms than it was in 1997. But it is really not cheap for the student. So the government just raised tuition fees to £9,535 a year. A maintenance loan for people who are not at home is £10,227 or £13,348 in London. So after a 3-year typical degree, you're paying back £59,000 or £68,000 in London. That is a lot of money. And the government, of course, having already increased fees once in this Parliament, having promised to reduce the cost for graduates, they've increased fees instead, and there must be a decent chance that they continue to go up from now on, unless the Minister wants to contradict me on that. And yet, over the last decade, we've been worrying a lot about the financial plight of younger people. Ever since really David Willetts' amazing book, The Pinch, we've been thinking about how we can make it easier for younger people to get on in life. And having these huge amounts to repay, and in some cases rather high marginal rates, makes it much more difficult for them. We now can see that over time, the point at which you start repaying your loan to make the system financially sustainable for taxpayers has indeed reduced, as has been alluded to. In 2005, you had to be earning about 30% more than someone full-time on the minimum wage to start repaying. As of next April, you can be earning less than someone working full-time on the minimum wage, 2% less, and still be repaying. So this thing has become more like a graduate tax. It's not quite like a graduate tax. You don't repay if you're not earning. But it is more like a tax, and it's a high one. If you are a postgraduate on top of that, or if you have a couple of kids and end up being hit by the high-income child benefit charge, then you really are facing extraordinary marginal rates, even on middling incomes. You mean the 50, 60,000 range. If you have one postgraduate loan or 2 kids, you can end up paying a 70% marginal tax rate as a young person. A 70% tax rate. That's insane. And the government have made the decision not to reform the HICBIC, the High Income Child Benefit Charge. So this problem is going to go on and get worse. So this is all by way of context for, yes, there are pressures in higher education, but there are also pressures on young people. It's not easy. So before we just increase those charges further, before we just increase tuition fees even more and just tip in more money, we absolutely have to think about reforms. Now, advocates of higher education, including me, would say, look, there's a lot of higher education that is brilliant for people's earnings. It's good economic investment. But we know, because of the decision taken by the last government to create the longitudinal educational outcomes database, that not everybody benefits from going to higher education, at least not economically. The Institute for Fiscal Studies' seminal report on this found that, seen over their whole lifetime, we estimate the total returns, this combining the perspective of both the taxpayer and the student, we estimate the total returns will be negative for around 30% of both men and women. So for about 30% of people, it is not working out, at least in economic terms. Now, economics is not the only thing in life. It will always be worth us funding some things which are simply worth it for their own sake. They are beautiful, they are good, we think they are nice things. But let us not forget that a lot of things that are also economically beneficial are also beautiful, true, interesting, and worthy in their own right. It's cool to know that, for example, the word for Lent comes from the Old English for lengthen, because plants grow in the spring, and that's when Lent is. That's the origin of that word. It's cool to know things like that. It's also cool to know how to build an ion drive, or how monoclonal antibodies work, or innumerable other things in the hard sciences or other subjects as well. Now, we will always want to spend some things that are just worth it in their own right, but the question is how much. If we are spending £20 billion a year on student loans, let's hypothetically say the IFS are about right, and it's about 30% is not worth it, £6 billion, that's about 10 times what we spend on the Arts Council. How much do you want to spend on not economically beneficial higher education? And shouldn't thinking about some of those courses be your first port of call before you just increase taxes on young people? because we could potentially do things to reform the system, as the last government were starting to do, which would be of benefit to both the young person and the wider economy. You are not actually doing a young person a favour. If you put them on a course and you say, this would be great for you, you're on this, let's say it's some creative arts course, you're going to be the next Johnny Ive, you're going to design the next iPad, you're going to have great outcomes, this degree is going to take you where you want to go, and that's not true. And we can see that some of them have fantastically low earnings, and they feel like they've been lied to, they feel like they've been missold something. And that is not, thankfully, the median experience of students, but it's quite a lot of students' experience, and we've got to worry about that. And so, while I'm totally sympathetic to those who say, let's find more resources, let's find resources for the best of HE, we do also need to have that conversation about lower economic value HE, if I can call it that, before we start just increasing taxes on young people who are so high-pressed already, even further. Now, there are many questions about exactly how you would do that, lots of technicalities, but I think in principle, surely that should be our first port of call. And finding those resources would let us either do more in high-value higher education, it might let us help the Cinderella sector, the perpetual Cinderella sector that is further education, or we could just take the burden off of young people a bit more. Now, it's not for me in this debate to sort of set out our entire vision of how we would reform HE, and I have a couple of questions for the Minister before I close. In particular, I really want to encourage her to talk about a decision taken just this week by the Office for Students to stop accrediting new institutions. This has numerous consequences which are bad. First, it is a block to brilliant new entrants like NMIT in Hereford or Dyson and these things that have come in and been brilliant additions to the higher education sector. But it also potentially locks very large numbers of young people out of student support. And so I want to ask the Minister what estimate she has made of the number of young people who will now not be able to access student support as a result of the decision made by the OFS this week. The second question on that point is how long this, quotes, pause will go on for. I saw ministers defending the decision to stop doing this. It was initially presented as a pause. I hope it's not a permanent end to any new entrants into the sector. So can the Minister tell us a little bit about when she plans to end this pause? And can the Minister just confirm, we've been playing a game of cat and mouse across Parliament about this national insurance increase. Bizarrely, one department, Defence, have answered the question, how much does the national insurance increase cost your department? Defence can answer it, but seemingly no other department can. The questions I asked the Department for Education a month ago, about how much it's costing schools, universities, blah, 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 have somehow not been answered, and the same is true across about 50 different domains in government. We can't have a meaningful Parliament, we can't have meaningful discussions in this building if the government is not prepared to answer basic questions about the consequences of its own policies, right? They will want to say, we're giving you this wonderful increase in spending, whatever the field might be. Maybe it's childcare, maybe it's schools, maybe it's something outside education. And actually, it turns out it's not true. The universities, because the sector has worked it out for itself, and because we know exactly how much the government are putting in because the fees increase, we can see that that seeming gift is completely wiped out by the national insurance increase. We can see that there's giving with one hand and taking away with the other. But in other sectors, the government are just refusing to answer the question, which I think is really, really poor. So can the Minister, she stands up today, promise me that she will, not just for higher education, but also for childcare, also for schools, finally answer the question that I asked a month ago and tell us the most basic information that taxpayers and voters deserve to know. How much is the national insurance increase going to cost our public services? Why does the government think it cannot answer this question? It is genuinely, genuinely disgraceful. So I have every sympathy, to conclude, with those who are under financial pressure in higher education institutions. In some cases, look, there's been misadventure, right? People have taken out ridiculous loans that are now rolling over, or they have become very, very exposed to one type of overseas student. And I was intrigued to hear the contributions from the members from Erewash and Luton South, encouraging the government to allow more student dependence as a way of selling higher education. I remember a speech by one honourable member in this House just the other day, I think it was yesterday. Someone stood up and was condemning the open borders experiment of the last government. And I thought this is a wonderful road to Damascus moment from the Labour Party. They finally agreed. They finally agreed with people like me that they didn't want to just endlessly increase immigration in an attempt to prop up higher education, for example. And I will give way, and I hope that the Honourable Lady, as she rises to her feet, will agree with me, because she mentioned in her speech that she thought it was good that the government were increasing fees to allow more resources for universities, that she will confirm that she shares my understanding that actually the overall amount of resources is going down because of the national, in real terms, because of the national insurance increase. Oh, I'm so sorry.
If it applies, I just wanted to ask him if he would mind clarifying his memory about what I actually asked, which was, had an impact assessment been done with regards to that decision, rather than making an opinion of it one way or the other?
Oh, okay, sorry. I had misunderstood the Honourable Lady's thought. I thought that she was pressing the Minister to reverse that decision and to allow more overseas dependence as a way of encouraging overseas students to prop up higher education. I totally misunderstood. I thought that the Honourable Lady was asking for something or pressing for something that she clearly wasn't. But look, I'll conclude. I'm clearly over time. The Minister, I hope, will answer some of these questions. I actually sympathise with the Minister. This is a difficult challenge here. This is a knotty policy question. I will be behind her when she makes sensible decisions, and I wish her all the best in all her endeavours to try and tackle some of these problems, not just for our universities, but also for our young people.
Thank you. Minister Janet Davey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Erewash, on securing this important debate on this subject. And as he's already spoken very eloquently, I am very aware that he has a keen interest in the financial stability of the higher education sector and, of course, on many other areas, and so does this government. But I wish to agree with him on, first, on how great our universities are, and I will attempt to respond to many points that he has raised. I'd also like to join with the honourable member for Cheltenham in really just acknowledging how fantastic our lecturers are and some of the excellent and great work that our universities do up and down our country. And of course I'd like to thank my honourable friend for Luton South and South Bedfordshire for her many contributions and indeed the many things you've said, but indeed around international students. I will also respond to the opposition minister, although I must say I find it very difficult in terms of the many things that he has said in relation to the pressures on young people, when indeed the last government had 14 years to do many things to take our universities out of the dire situation in which they now find themselves. And I also find it quite astonishing that the previous government, the opposition minister, has taken no responsibility for this situation and has offered no apology or acceptance for the many disadvantaged situations in which he himself has expressed, but the situations in which universities find themselves, and I find that quite astonishing indeed. I'm going to make some progress. I'm going to try and respond to the many areas and many things that have been said, unless you'd like to make an apology, and of course I will give way.
I just wondered, the Minister is complaining about the lack of resources in real terms for universities. Can she just confirm that because of the national insurance increase, real terms resources are going to be going down, because that wipes out the impact of the tuition fees increase, and of course the prices of everything are going up?
So indeed, no apology, no recognition of what I just said, and no recognition of being 14 years in government, previously in government. I'm going to make some progress. And there's many questions to respond to, and of course I will be very much focusing foremost on the member who has put in for the debate in the first place. So this government recognises that our world-leading higher education sector makes a vital contribution as both education and research institutions to our economy, to society, and to industry and innovation. They contribute to productivity and growth and play a crucial civic role in their communities. However, the sector needs a secure financial footing to face the challenges of the next decade. Indeed, we recognise the financial position of the sector is under pressure, and this government has already acted to address this. In July, Sir David Behan was appointed as interim chair of the Office for Students, the independent regulator of higher education in England. Sir David is overseeing the important work of refocusing the Office for Students' role to concentrate on key priorities, including the sector's financial stability. In recognition of the pressures facing the sector, on the 2nd of December, the Office for Students announced temporary changes to its operations to allow greater focus on financial sustainability. The OFS will work more closely with providers under significant pressure in order to protect the interests of the students. The OFS has rightly stated that an increasing number of providers will need to take bold action to address the impact of these challenges. All providers must continue to adapt to uncertainties and financial risk. And while the OFS has statutory duties in relation to the financial sustainability of the higher education sector, the government has a clear interest in understanding the sector's level of risk. My department continues to work closely with the OFS, the higher education representative groups such as Universities UK, and other government departments like the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And this helps to understand the financial sustainability in the sector. Now, if a provider was at risk of unplanned closure or indeed found itself in the process of exiting the sector, my department would work with the OFS, the provider and other government departments to ensure students' best interests were protected. Of course, higher education providers are autonomous bodies. As such, they are ultimately responsible for the decisions that they make about their operating model, day-by-day management and sustainability. However, this government very much recognises the need to put and sustain our world-leading higher education sector on a secure footing to ensure that all students have confidence that they will receive the world-class higher education experience that they indeed deserve. After 7 years of frozen fee caps under the previous government, on the 4th of November, the Secretary of State for Education announced that maximum fees for undergraduates will increase in line with inflation. In the 2025-26 academic year, fees will increase by 3.1%, from $9,250 to $9,535 for a standard full-time course, and from $11,100 to $11,440 for a full-time accelerated course, and from $6,935 to $7,145 for a part-time course. I'm aware that yesterday the Welsh Labour Government also announced that tuition fees will rise from $9,250 to $9,535 for standard full-time courses. Now, while this was a difficult decision, I believe the right decision has been made for UK higher education. However, I want to be clear that in return for the increased investment that we are asking students to make, we expect our providers to deliver the very best outcomes for both students, their areas, and of course the country. The government also recognises the impact that recent inflation has had on students, and that's why, in addition to increasing tuition fees to support our higher education providers, the Secretary of State has announced that maximum lows for living costs for undergraduate students will also increase in line with forecast inflation. In 2025-26 academic year, maximum loans for living costs will increase by 3.1%, from £10,227 to £10,544 for an undergraduate student living away from home and studying outside London. This will ensure that the most support is targeted at students from the lowest income families while keeping the student finance system financially sustainable. As part of the Secretary of State's announcements on the 4th of November, she set out our 5 priorities for reform of the higher education system. We will expect from our providers to, number 1, play a stronger role in expanding access and improving outcomes for disadvantaged students. Number 2, make a stronger contribution to economic growth. Number 3, to play a greater civic role in their communities, and many already do excellent work in this area. Number 4, raise the bar further on teaching standards to maintain and improve our world-leading reputation and drive out poor practice, which I'm very sure is their ambitions as well. And underpinning all of this, the sector must undertake a sustained efficiency and reform programme. We will publish our plan for higher education reform by summer 2025, and we will work with the sector and the OFS to ensure the system delivers these priorities. I want to take this opportunity to respond to my honourable friend from Erewash, to reaffirm the government's commitment to a United Kingdom that was outward-looking and welcomed international students, as was also comments made by my honourable friend for Luton South and South Bedfordshire. For too long, international students have been treated as footballs and not valued guests. This government will take a different approach, and we will speak clearly. We will be in no doubt international students are welcome in the UK. And that's why we are offering international students who successfully complete their studies the opportunities to remain in the UK, to work, to live, and to contribute to our national life. Now, I know there's been other comments and questions made on that issue, and I will endeavour to get back on those issues. So, before I... I've got much more to say, actually. So, now, I'm also aware that there have been calls to bring back the maintenance grants, and government continues to provide means-tested, non-repayable grants to low-income students with children and or adults who are financially dependent on them. Students undertaking nursing, midwifery and allied health professional courses also qualify for non-repayable grant support through the NHS Learning Support Fund. As we know, this is a space where much more needs to be done. We need to rebuild our NHS and pull it back on a secure footing. And these are some of the ways in which, as a government going forward, that we are trying to mend the failures of the past. However, we recognise there is much more to be done to support students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and we're determined to reverse the decline in participation rates for disadvantaged students. We expect the higher education sector to do more to support students by working with the government and the OFS, and by making the most of the lifelong learning entitlement, and we'll be setting out our longer term plans for the sector next year. Now, in terms of further announcements that have recently taken place by the OFS, now I understand there have been some concerns regarding this announcement, regarding the recent OFS announcement that it is enacting temporary changes to its operation to allow greater focus on financial sustainability. And as the Minister of State for Skills explained in the House of the Lords in the other place yesterday, this decision by the OFS reflects the government's determination to move our providers towards a firmer financial footing. The refocusing of the OFS on the issue of financial sustainability and our decision to increase tuition fees demonstrates our ambition to create a secure future for our world-leading higher education sector. Now, before I offer my closing remarks, I want to briefly set out this government's position on research funding, which of course is the responsibility of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. We committed to record funding for research and development in the recent budget. We are increasing core research funding to over £6.1 billion to offer real terms protection to the UK's world-leading research base and support UK research and innovation to deliver on the UK's key research priorities. This government is determined to work with the sector to transition to sustainable research funding models, including increasing research grant cost recovery. Now, I wish again to thank everybody who has contributed significantly to this debate.
I am very grateful to the debate. I just wondered if I could repose my question. I just don't think it's okay to not answer basic questions about how much national insurance increase is costing education providers, be they nurseries, be they schools, be they universities. Tell me, the Minister confirmed she is going to answer these questions, right?
Well, I understand there are some concerns regarding the sector, regarding how the sector will contend with increases to employer national insurance contributions. And as the Chancellor set out in the budget, raising the revenue required to fund public services and restore economic stability requires difficult decisions on tax, which is why the government is asking employers to contribute more. We strongly believe that this is the fairest choice to help fund the NHS and wider national priorities, areas that have been failed by the previous government, areas where we strongly need a greater focus on building up public services, public provision. Now, as set out in the November update on the financial sustainability of the sector, the OFS estimate that the fee uplift will represent up to an additional 371 million of annual fee income. The employer national insurance contribution changes will result in additional costs for the sector of 133 million. In 2024 to 25, 430 million each year from 2025 to 26. The Department plans to publish its own estimate shortly as part of its assessments of impacts of the planned tuition fee and student finance changes. Now, we are committed to creating a secure future for our world-leading higher education sector so it can deliver for students, taxpayers, workers and indeed the economy. Whilst the government has already taken action to help move the sector towards a more sustainable and stable financial footing, we recognise that a real change of approach is needed, both from the government and from the sector itself, to support our broader plans for higher education. For this reason, we look forward to working in partnership with the sector, the Office for Students, Department for Science, Innovation and Technology and the UK Research and Innovation to shape the changes to government policy. Thank you.
Madam Thompson to wind up.
Thank you, Chair, and it remains a great privilege to serve under your chairship. I'd just like to thank all the members and the Minister and the Shadow Minister for their participation today, who have all made fantastic points in today's debate. My honourable friend, the member for Luton South and South Bedfordshire, talked about the importance of supporting diverse communities and disadvantaged backgrounds, particularly at the University of Bedfordshire, and I know that lots of our post-92 institutions do an excellent job of that, so I thank her for raising for that. My colleague, the Honourable Member for Cheltenham, talked about the maintenance grants and international students and the importance of supporting both of these areas moving forward. I agree with him on both of those points. And the Shadow Minister, the member for Harborough, Oby and Wigston, thank you for his contribution. Thank him for his contribution, and I think he raised a lot of important points that are salient for us moving forward. My thanks very much to the Minister, the Honourable Member for Lewisham East. I'd like to associate myself with her comments about how important our universities are, how our lecturers are fantastic, and very much welcome her points about the OFS's new focus on financial stability and indeed funding for research and ensuring students' best interests are protected throughout the sector moving forward. I very much welcome the Secretary of State's priorities on the government's commitments on the sector, and I think this is a fantastic opportunity for us to work cross-party on this issue, because this is a very difficult and complex problem that is serving many of our universities across the country, and it's not going away. So I'm very grateful for starting that conversation for all the members that have come today. Thank you again for your chairship, Ms. Bass.
The question is that this House has considered the financial sustainability of higher education. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.